Freezing cold in ancient shoes all.
You're the cold maze, say one, freezing cold in ancient shoes all. Alright!
We don't stay in the shoes now, and whole building scene in a whole red maybe get the color boss dying. Chance of mine, we get the cold, baby, stay yet, little Joe. We don't stay in the shoes now, and whole building scene in a whole red maybe get the color boss dying. When it's the same range, you'll come be steen. You know, for some another just God, David's a shame. You the cover not choose, not right, for not so hobble, just getting a lot of cover, no time. Oh, but if it's a stand, like the shoes go, my man. You would trust to the man, it's called the radio girls. Oh, Sunday.
On the Tuesday and Wednesday, how were we feeling? We were feeling
pretty pessimistic at that point. We
yeah.
were kind of thinking, why are we here? We need to kind of head off home, kind of thing.
I remember just regretting it quite a lot,
Yeah.
going, just because I felt I'd spent a lot of money on the trip.
And
We'd
we were
been in
both
London for almost a week at that point.
we were both pretty ill at this point.
Yeah, we got really
Really
unwell. We got really ill, like
Coughing
a
up
couple.
phlegm every morning. It was disgusting.
Yeah, it was like a couple days in, we got a horrific chest infection, both of us, because we were sharing a tent. And we were pretty diminished.
Yeah.
But on the Thursday, I remember like getting up and going to talk to people like we normally would. But I was feeling a lot more optimistic, just because like we were talking to so many people, and there was so many people that were like they really believed in the cause and they wanted change, which was like really.
It was inspiring.
Like,
it was inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, at points. It was just the like structure and organisation of the actual Extinction Rebellion group that was questionable, rather than the people involved. The people that are involved, like, big thanks to you. Like, you're the people that are making the difference. Do you remember any key points?
Key points. Well, the fact that the protesters managed to put a few blocks, these huge wooden blocks, and in the middle of Trafalgar Square, which was blocking the road.
Oh yeah, the structures.
They basically ran up to the top, and there was about 15 police running after them. Yeah. And he jumped up, and he got a handcuff and handcuffed himself to the top of the wooden block.
Yeah,
there was a few displays of that.
All right, then now listen carefully. For those who haven't played the game, let's tell you how to do it. Now look, all you got to do, like, is when the whistle's blown, I want you to go.
But before we went, we heard the reputation of the protesters being quite a middle-class artsy movement, kind of locking anybody else out in a way because of the disruption caused to people trying to just get to their jobs. And we definitely saw that. There was a lot of people there, thousands and thousands. We didn't meet everybody, but for the most part, the people that we met were very upper middle class, just from the London area. There were a few from other places, but they were able to take time out of work, so it kind of says something about where they stand. We also noticed that regular people just trying to work and get around and commute were really, they were quite affronted to the whole movement, just because they'd come through the camp trying to get to work and just like, they wouldn't be able to get there on time, obviously, like losing money, getting in trouble with managers and stuff, which like, it's not exactly fair.
Again, I used to do that all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
No, just makes me want to do it more.
Sure. Can't really do it here though, it's all tubes.
Next point. The police were incredibly effective at
Yeah.
dealing with the protests.
Yeah.
Not even in the way that they just pushed us off land, like the way that they were speaking to us, everybody was like incredibly respectful. And if anybody wasn't, the police dealt with that like really professionally, which was good to see, but at the same time, it just made us feel like there wasn't enough pressure actually put on the police.
And the pressure slowly built up, and more crazy things were being done by the protesters.
Yeah.
So like the police basically, they were like employing a siege tactic. So XR originally had 5 or 6 bases around central London. So we had St James's Park, Trafalgar Square, Whitehall, the big church, what's it called again? St Paul's?
The cathedral.
Yeah, is it called St Paul's? St Paul's and that whole area around there, and all the other surrounding areas, all the roads to the bridges and stuff were blocked. But the police, realising that there weren't the same amount of people as in Trafalgar Square, they started slowly, bit by bit, taking the bases away until everyone was trapped in Trafalgar Square. So there was like a few thousand people at least.
I remember we went to the airport on Thursday.
Yeah.
And I remember coming back, and Trafalgar Square was the only like operational camp because it was the only legal camp left. St James's Park was like totally gone. I got off the tube, came above ground at St James's Park, and there was like nobody there. The only people there were people whose stuff had been taken by the police and like requisitioned. Sorry, somebody just came in. The only people left were people whose stuff had been requisitioned by the police and had nowhere else to go, so they just stuck around because they didn't have a home to go to easily, and they wanted their stuff back. That was another criticism that I have of the police. The way that the only criticism I have of them was the way that they handled people's possessions.
Yeah, they basically just. Well, was it the third day or fourth day that they?
Yeah, when they pushed us up to Trafalgar
I think they
Square.
Suspected something dodgy was going on, something tense, like someone was smoking or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And they just ripped away the tents and like took away like the whole like, perimeter of the camp and just ripped them away.
It was
and
like
just build them into a mountain of tents, and then people were like saying, "All my stuff is here, all my keys, my wallet, all my possessions are all in here," and the police were just indiscriminately just ripping them away.
I was talking to people that lost about 500, 600 pounds worth of equipment that they used for university. Yeah,
Wow.
These two university students, all of their laptops, cameras and stuff were inside their tent, and they got lobbed into a lorry on the Thursday night. It was the night that I lost you because you were arrested.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to deter anybody. Everybody like kept going. They were even handing out tents.
They were
like people were like sorting accommodation, which was another key part of the organisation. But yeah, I feel bad for the people who lost all their.
Yeah. But at the same time, I guess we're kind of asking for it. Maybe.
Yeah, true. That's the risk that you take going to a protest.
Yeah.
But if it is deemed a legal protest, and then a few days into it, it's deemed illegal.
Yeah. But then at the same time, we need to maybe change the topic. I guess it can't be legal protest anymore.
Yeah.
It needs to be illegal.
We are uncooperative crusties, and we're proud of it. Uncooperative. Uncooperative. As uncooperative crusties, we do not accept the individuation of responsibility. We do not accept the atomization of society. We come together to change the world.
Take a risk, your eyes improve.
Witch Hazel.
So my name is Freya Stowe, and I've been studying HND1 music this year, and I've been studying for 3 years at this college. I started with the 6-month introductory course to music and worked my way up the grades ever since. Well, I first got interested in music the average way people do, which is from your parents listening to music and then just going on there yourself. I enjoy studying music because you get a more kind of in-depth look at what you're doing and what you want to do with yourself. You get to look at the history of music and the business side of music that you wouldn't normally get a look at if you weren't at college. I chose HND1 music because it was the next step up from the class I was doing before, the NC6 class, and it leads on to HND2 and then a degree course if you want to. And it just basically consists of harder versions of what I've been doing for the last 3 years. So it's just a more challenging kind of look at what we're doing. We start off the week with kind of a theory/songwriting class. We have to switch over, which is quite strange. And theory is obviously it's just like written down music, or the language of music kind of thing. Songwriting, it might seem like something you can't really teach, but apparently you can. And then we've got our performance class, obviously, on Fridays. That's always really one of the more fun things you can do. Studio as well, that's something we learn. You get to have a look at the technical side of things, as well as MIDI production and sound production on computers. That's and then there's the essay writing, the written things, graded unit. That's something fun we're looking forward to. Sure. think Edinburgh College has a lot of good facilities for music students, especially because of the facilities we have in the music box, like the studio, getting to use it after hours. The booths like this one, you get to practice whenever you want to. You just book it out with your student card, and it's quite fair, really. You pay a £50 facilities fee at the start of the course, and then you just get to kind of use whatever you like within reason. And we also do an open mic lunchtime on a Wednesday as well, so I think that's something that we do that maybe other colleges don't do. There's a wide variety of instruments that get played here, I'd say. I mean, there's a lot of classical students as well, and we're on the pop side of things in my class, so it's always good to kind of, you can collaborate as well with people when you're doing a performance. So we've had a few people grab some violinists, cellists, things like that, and put them into a pop group, which is always a good thing, and I just think it's great we can all work together like that. The performances, I think they're really good. The auditorium is a good place to have them, and usually everyone's working at a really good level, and everything's always sounding good, thanks to Gary, the technician, as well. I want to go into the HND 2 course after this, and then I was hoping to go off to Abertay to study some kind of video game sound or music design type of thing. But yeah, so hopefully we'll be at uni doing something.
Michela. I live in Valseriana, a small area in the north of Italy. And I think that at the beginning of this situation, at the beginning of this pandemic, no one could imagine this situation. Is very, very incredible. Here, a lot of old people, a lot of grandparents, a lot of old generation died, and is really, really sad. I also think that also when pandemic will stop, will finish, we hope very, very soon. Our life can't totally return at the normal situation, and I think that probably something will be changed.
My name is Berenica and I'm a firefighter. This current situation has a big impact on everybody just now. I obviously can't stay home because I work for emergency service. However, my husband, he's off for 4 weeks just now, and it might get extended for another month depending on the situation. We've also have our own business that is unfortunately shut just now, and we're not really sure what's going to happen with that afterwards. However, we realise that we're really lucky considering the fact that I can still work and I'm paid, because I know not everybody has that luxury at the moment. I hope it will all end soon and we can all get back to our normal life. So stay safe and stay home.
Stay at home.
Stay at home.
Stay at home, guys.
Stay at home.
Stay at home.
Stay at home.
The Department of Health has announced in the last half hour that 14 more people across Britain have died after testing positive for coronavirus. It brings the total number of deaths here in the UK so far to 35. The Health Secretary for England, Matt Hancock, has warned that the measures the government would take to combat the coronavirus will disrupt the ordinary lives of almost everybody in the country. He confirmed that in the coming weeks, people over the age of 70 and other vulnerable people will be asked to self-isolate. In other words, staying at home and cutting down.
Parlare di coronavirus, vi abbiamo raccontato questa mattina di scaffali vuoti nei supermercati, di farmacie sotto pressione, di uffici pubblici chiusi, luoghi di aggregazione, ma anche cinema e bar dove appunto la gente non può.
Hola, buenas tardes. Comenzamos un programa especial para ofrecerles en directo todos los datos relacionados con el avance de la pandemia ya en todo el mundo de coronavirus. Está prevista la comparecencia del presidente del...
20,000 deaths, both numbers the most in the world, but it is important to consider the size of our country compared to some of the other hard-hit ones.
Y bueno, pues empecé a tener síntomas, malestar, me sentía muy débil hasta que empecé a tener fiebre. Como vivo con una doctora, creemos, porque ella primero presentó síntomas, lo que pasa es que le dijeron que era una faringitis, luego resultó que tenía coronavirus, me lo contagió a mí. Lo que tuve es mucha debilidad, casi no podía moverme, tuve fiebre bastantes días, mucho dolor de cabeza y un día que tenía muchísima fiebre era casi incapaz de moverme de la cama y es el día que más dificultad tuve para respirar. Y me planteé pues llamar a urgencias, pero claro, estaban tan saturados los hospitales y demás que digo, es que aunque llame seguramente no venga nadie. Y yo dije, bueno, pues no hay nada que hacer.
What at the very beginning of this year and the end of the previous one looked like just a Chinese problem. This virus, SARS-CoV-2 and its disease COVID-19 have paralyzed the entire world with its spreading. China, Thailand, South Korea, France, Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom and the United States of America, Brazil, Russia, Australia, Kenya, and just a few countries within the entire list. In total, more than 6.5 million people have been infected from SARS-CoV-2 and nearly 400,000 have died so far because of the disease COVID-19 or related with it. That's our figures according to the Center for Systems Science and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins University. SARS-CoV-2 is a coronavirus, means that it's developed and hosted animals. It is not very common for them to jump into humans, but sometimes it can happen. This one is quite similar to other previous one, named SARS, acronym from Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, describing what the people can suffer from once that they get worse. Its origin was as well in China, in 2002. It is suspected that before to jump into humans there was another host, like a pangolin or another wild spice considered as a delicacy in the Asian cuisine. Within this host, the virus could have mutated before sinking into humans and transmit its disease. As this coronavirus is novel, there is no previous knowledge about it, apart from the one that is being collected through the experience. There is a bunch of information, but some of them are more reliable than others. At the moment, what has been verified is that it is spread through droplets of saliva or discharge from an infected nose, like cough or sneeze. So it is very important to cover them up. Without a vaccine yet, the way to protect yourself and the others so far is by washing your hands frequently, not touching your face, and social distance, as the World Health Organization advises. Also is known that the first outbreak was in a wet market in the Chinese city of Wuhan, but we are struggling to put a freight train. Víctor Escribano, a Spanish correspondent in China for FINC, was one of the first Spanish journalists to cover and report.
Desde Pekín, Víctor Escribano, Agencia EFE. It is thought, I don't know if that's the case anymore, but at least the official theory that the outbreak began in a seafood market in Wuhan, which it turned out to have something more than seafood, but at the time they were just talking about a fish and seafood market. As far as I know, EFE was the first medium in Spanish language that published information about the outbreak. Mm-hmm. It was on the 3rd of January. It was me, the one who wrote the article, which I'm not sure if I can feel proud of that or not. But anyway, and it was I don't know, maybe 2-3 days that from maybe the 31st of December or the 1st of January that the state media was already publishing information on the outbreak. At first, they was just talking about on a strange pneumonia from unknown origin. Then nobody was mentioning the coronavirus, and nobody was mentioning, at least from an official side, that it was any kind of virus similar to SARS. It didn't look like it was going to be something this big at first. So I don't know if they were downplaying it, or if they were just not aware of the dimension that this was going to have with the time.
The number of confirmed patients has now topped 28,000.
On the 31st of December, they communicated the WHO about this outbreak, and then right the next day they closed this market and started to disinfect and try to trace the contacts and everything. When we talk about the stringent measures, which is the lockdown of Wuhan, which is something a little bit better known in the outside of China, and that was, as far as I remember, on the 23rd of January. When the authorities decided to lock Wuhan down, and it was just 3 days after the government, the national government, Beijing government, I mean, decided to declare the national emergency. So we can differentiate. There was a first phase of local measures, which were limited to Wuhan, which can take from maybe the 31st of December to the, I don't know, maybe the 15th or 16th of January. And then from that point onwards, there were other more harsh measures, because they started to realize that the dimension of the outbreak was a little bit more than just a couple of people with pneumonia from a seafood market.
$242 deaths on Wednesday. This is a massive jump from the past couple of days, when the number of totally newly confirmed patients in mainland China was between 2,000 and 3,000.
Victims are said to have been infected at this Wuhan fish market, which has since been disinfected, but authorities are fighting a difficult battle.
Did you mention that market? How is the quality of the cleanness? How is the quality of this cleanness of this kind of supermarket, and how is the law that allow to sell out different kinds of species, different kinds of seafood or poultry in that case?
Here we have to differentiate, which is what is a wet market. That's the beginning of everything. A wet market is what in Europe, for example, we call a market. I mean, it's just a place where they sell fish and meat and fruits, things that can rot away. Okay, and then there's the difference with the dry market, where you can buy things that are not going to get bad with the time, right? So you can buy, I don't know, clothes or spices there. You know, that's the difference. So there's one important point that we cannot avoid, because some people are pushing this narrative that it's all because of the wet markets, which is something really typical in Asia and even if in Africa, but it comes also from Europe as well. I think it all comes down to the hygiene standards that you can usually find in those kind of markets. And my feeling, of course, I have not visited that specific market, but I can tell you from what I've seen in some places in China, I wouldn't say that it's as bad as many people think. It's not way worse than what we have in Europe. For example, in Beijing, the wet markets that are surrounding my house are pretty decent and clean. I mean, that's where we do our groceries, and we've never had any kind of problem. Wuhan is a pretty big city, which many people didn't know about before this outbreak. It's home for 11 million people, and I think that in these kind of second-tier cities, they're called this way in China, the hygiene measures are not as bad as some people think. We come down to this topic of which species are sold. Officially, that market was just as the state media stated the first days. It was a seafood and fish market, but then it turned out that you could find any kind of animal that you would like, or you as a Westerner you wouldn't like to consume. But for some people in China, they're delicacies. So yeah, you could find them there. There was a law in which was approved in 1988, as far as I know, which is the Wildlife Protection Act, as far as I remember, and it allowed to breed legally some of these really strange species, such as civet cats or pangolins, whatever. Okay, so the thing is, after you have to fast forward to 2003. That was right after the SARS outbreak, which was another kind of coronavirus, which the outbreak began in a wet market in Foshan, which is a city close to Hong Kong and Guangzhou. And then the government decided to, I wouldn't say close, but to crack down on this kind of not the markets, but the things that they were selling on the markets. And they, for some time, prohibited the trade and consumption of wild animals. Then, with time, when everything happened to be under control and when people felt like that was a thing of the past, the government lifted those kind of restrictions. And now the government seems to be pushing forward with a law that will not just prohibit to eat wildlife, because then it all comes down to what is wildlife and what is not. Because, for example, if you're breeding in a farm, let's say bears, which is something that has been happening in China in a really small scale, but it has been happening. If they're farm bred, they're not wild. Then you can just say, no, it's not wildlife. I mean, these are not wild animals because I bred them. But in this case, the government seems to be pushing for a white list. What is a white list? It's when, for example, instead of just banning, saying this animal is banned, they're going to just say, this is the list of the animals that you can consume, that you can breed, and that you can trade with for human consumption. And this is what the government seems to be pushing right now.
The Chinese government was in silence for 6 days at the beginning of what was a regional outbreak. From the 14th to the 20th, no news or evidence of the virus meanwhile it was spreading. Even a banquet took place in the city of Wuhan.
If you ask me about this banquet, it happened. It definitely happened. It was I don't know how many hundreds or thousands or people attended. It was a popular event there in Wuhan, which used to happen before the Chinese New Year, as far as I remember. And the local authorities decided to go forward, even if there was a local transmission, because we have to say one thing: there was no sustainable evidence that there was human-to-human transmission up to, as far as I remember, 20th of January. And it was not the authorities who disclosed that, but this really famous epidemiologist, Zhong Nangshan, who came up in live TV and disclosed these details. Until then, it was thought that one person couldn't pass the virus to another. But in the meanwhile, it was happening. I'm not sure if the authorities were already aware of that. And in this case, if they were and they went forward with this banquet, it's pretty difficult to understand. But anyway, there's one thing in China, and it's the obsession with stability of the leadership.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it comes from the top leadership in Beijing or even from the most local government that you can imagine, just in a small village. All right. So there's this obsession with not telling bad news to your bosses, and not making people nervous with bad news that they should not have the need to listen to. The other part of the story, which is not always told, at least not in international media, is that people are, I mean, the people in charge, the authorities, are scared first of their bosses, and then of the reaction that disclosing too much information to the people can have. My feeling is that the authorities in Wuhan thought it was going to be, it was not going to be this big. They decided to shut up. It's not just even cover up, because as I said, the media was reporting on that, but they decided not to act as if it was a really big health crisis, as it turned out to be, after all.
One of the workhorses what had been feeding more doubts about the credibility of China around the world are the figures that they have been disclosing until now. How is possible, for example, be one of the less affected countries from this virus? How accurate are the figures that they are disclosing?
That's the main question for me as well. I cannot really give an answer to that, because I wish I could have access to the hidden data that I think they have. But what I can tell you is that from the beginning, we have been pretty doubtful of the accuracy of the data that they were disclosing. We have always been writing in our articles that all the data was according to official figures.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, I did not really believe it or not. I was pretty, skeptical about that. But I was telling people, and I was telling my bosses, and I was writing in my articles that there is no other way to independently verify if those numbers are true or not. There is no other way that you can access any kind of statistics, or there is no unofficial media or private media, which actually exist in China, but they usually try not to confront too much or too openly what the government says. I really think that China now has realized that the rest of the world is starting to doubt about the accuracy of their data. Mm-hmm. And for example, a couple of weeks ago in Wuhan, they announced that they were going to make a study, epidemiological study, to see how many asymptomatic cases there were, to see if there were any mistakes on the count or anything like that. And then a couple of days after that, they heightened the number of deaths by 50%. We're going to keep doing that with the time, because it's unsustainable to think that a country that is home to a fifth of global population, and where the pandemic started, has, for example, I don't know, if you compare it to Spain, it's less than a quarter of the number of dead people that we have in Spain. They will, after all, revise that number upwards. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm not sure if they will ever disclose a real number of cases and deaths, but I'm sure that they will revise their official figure up.
I believe the same thing that the rest of the people, that it's a normal flu, that is not so dangerous, but when you see that all the cases and the speed of the expansion of the virus, you see that is more dangerous than we thought in a principle.
How COVID-19 has ended up in Italy?
Oh, it's difficult to know. In the beginning, we identified the one patient, the patient number 1, on February 21st. So it was a guy who went to Codogno Hospital. Codogno is a city or a town next to Milan.
Yeah.
So this guy went to the hospital a couple of times. Nobody identified that it could be COVID-19. And after 1 week, he went back. And that was the moment in which a doctor, who now has become very, very famous in Italy, thought that maybe this guy could have COVID-19. So they made the PCR proof the first time, the test, and it was positive. So this guy became officially the patient 1. The problem is that he's a 38 years old guy, and he went a couple of times to have dinner with a friend who was just returned from China. The problem is that this patient 0 never, they made a couple of tests to him, like a serological test and PCR test, and he was negative in both. So the official patient 0 was not patient 0, and probably the official patient 1 was patient 1000, because after that it was discovered that at the end of December there were some very strange cases in Lombardy. They made a serological test to all these guys who had this pneumonia end of December, and they discovered that it was COVID-19. So probably the virus was circulating in Italy from end of November.
Wow.
We will never know. We will never know. So the most important thing is that for us, the patient 1 probably was the patient 1000.
The death toll in Italy is now higher than anywhere else in the world, including China.
But how is possible that Italy could overtake China in number of cases and deaths? How the government has tried to stop the spread of this virus? Anira Zabal, Spanish correspondent in Rome for the Basque Country Television, will give us more details.
And the problem is that when they first closed 10 towns in Lombardy and 1 in Veneto, and then after that a couple of weeks passed, and they realized that most of the Lombardy had the same problem, and they decided to close Lombardy, and after that was too late. So taking into account that a lot of people from Lombardy flew away to go to the south, the government decided that it was much better to close the whole country. But let's say that the dangerous part was only in the north, and this has been kept like this in the past 3 weeks. 3 months. We haven't seen big contagion points in the south and in the middle of Italy. The north of the country, which is the most industrialized part of the country, let's say the most economically developed place, has much more relation with Europe and with the rest of the world than with the south of Italy. So even if there is no a wall which divides Italy, Milan is much more connected to the world, to China, United States, Europe, than with Rome. So this is a very important, I think it's a very important aspect to understand why in such a fast matter, the virus has been, let's say, spread in Spain, in Mexico, in Nigeria, in the United States by Italian people, but mostly from Lombardy, than seeing a spreading of the virus from Lombardy to the south of Italy. The flights to go everywhere, you have I think they were flights to Wuhan almost every day. And it's very connected to, for example, Washington, New York, Brasilia, And if you see the first cases that were identified in these countries, that maybe were not the one patient, like patient number one, but were the first one who were identified, where all of them had a connection with someone who came from Italy. So I think this is a very important aspect to take into account.
19th February, 40,000 people at San Siro to watch Atlanta Bergamo plays against Valencia.
They say that it was this football match between Atalanta, Bergamo and Valencia. They say that this could be one of the biological bombs, let's say, a lot of people together in a stadium which is open but not very open, in which there's a lot of physical contact between the people. And then you have to take into account that if the first cases, let's say, started in the end of December, and the contagion is exponential, it makes sense, because you need more or less 2 months to arrive into that point.
Il nostro paese si trova ad affrontare emergenze nazionali, ma siamo un paese forte, un paese che non si arrende, è nel nostro DNA. Stiamo affrontando la sfida del coronavirus, è una sfida che non ha colore politico.
The popularity of the Prime Minister of Giuseppe Conte is quite high, it's like 67%. The problem is that he's governing in coalition with two political parties. Partito Democratico, which is center-left, and Movimento 5 Stelle, Five-Star Movement, which is like a, let's say, center-right populist party. And so the coalition is quite weak from a political point of view. The good thing in Italy is that the political institutions are very strong, and you have the figure of the Presidente della Repubblica, the President of the Republic, which is Sergio Mattarella, and he's a very respected political representative in Italy. So in the beginning of the crisis, he made a call for unity. So he said that all the political parties might unite, let's say, together with the Prime Minister. So he asked not to divide, not to have any kind of political, let's say, polemics or tensions. In the beginning, the situation was that difficult, and nobody could understand anything, and people were very afraid, and we didn't know how much the virus was diffused in the country. So we were like, people were really afraid when they closed the country, when they decided to isolate the country.
In 1 week, we were all at home. Lockdown. A lot of people were a bit scared about everything, because this quarantine was difficult to understand, and to understand the virus and everything. I thought it was a bit too much, because we didn't know the dangerous situation, because no one told us anything real about this virus. But now that we know that is killing a lot of people, how doctors are works and everything, I think is the best things he could do to save Italian people.
People trusted him and believed him, and I think this helped in the beginning to not to have a lot of confusion, to try to keep the Italians at home, which was the most important thing in the beginning of the crisis, right? But now I guess that the situation is much better. Let's say the sanitary crisis, it's over, or it looks like, and now we are facing an economic crisis.
E lavoro come va?
Zero. Tutto fermo.
In the last few weeks, Stefano Cappelli's income's dropped to €30 a day.
E per quanto tempo riesce così?
Io?
Sì.
Non lo so, se non fanno... Non lo so.
Un mese, 2?
No, 2 no.
Non-essential business are closed, lack of income, people cannot make money, and they have their own needs. It is the perfect scenario for mafia start to showing its support to the Italians.
It's been a huge issue here because mostly Roberto Saviano, the writer and journalist Roberto Saviano, wrote an article saying like we have to take care of this thing because this is becoming an issue, especially in the south of the country, like in the regions in which the mafia is still very strong, and it has a lot of influence, right? So the problem is that, as I told you before, it looks like the sanitary crisis is going away, but we are facing a huge economic crisis. Italy was facing that problem before the COVID-19 started like appearing in our daily life. So the mafia is taking advantage of this situation. So there are a lot of places in Italy where the state is not present. And where the state is not present, the mafia is very strong. A lot of families who are having problems, even to go to the supermarket to buy the basics, because there is a huge problem in Italy, and it's the bureaucracy. So the government, yes, has approved a lot of measures to help the people, like 500 euros to go shopping in the supermarket, family like bonuses for families to face the crisis. People who has lost their jobs are receiving money, but this money is arriving very late because the bureaucracy is very, very, very slow in Italy. So until this money arrives, people are still needing to do their daily things. And this is where the mafia is showing the support and trying to help the families to go to the supermarket, to buy food, to buy the necessary things, right? But the problem is that the mafia in return is asking other things.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest challenges of this crisis is to try to make the state to try that the state has to be strong and has to be everywhere in the country. And this is something that still not achieving it.
Deaths being carried in military trucks because of the huge number of them. A lot of infected. Italy has been one of the most harmed European countries, being the outbreak in the continent. Is it going to be launched any investigation?
Yeah, the prosecutor is doing some investigation about what happened in the hospitals in Lombardy, and especially what happened in the residences of old people, where we have counted the biggest amount of deaf people. So the biggest amount of victims in Italy were counted in these residences of old people. So the prosecutor is investigating this, and is also analyzing what happened in the hospitals. I mean, how come the virus was spreading that fast in the hospitals, and why some of the hospitals were not closed when they had to be closed. So this is something that, they are investigating, but I think it will take time. Here there was a huge polemic because in the beginning of the crisis, the government decided to close 10 towns in Lombardy. But at the same time, it was another area in Lombardy which had the same amount of sick people due to COVID-19. And these other towns were not closed, were not isolated. And there were a lot of journalistic investigations saying that this was due to the fact that in these towns, they were like one of the biggest companies and industries in Italy. So they made pressure not to close this area. And they made pressure for people to keep going to the factories. So all these things have been published, but now I guess it's the justice who has to see if it was really like this, and if there were really like economical pressures to keep on.
With a little delay in comparison with Italy, Spain as well has suffered dramatic consequences, even overtaking the Italian figures. Its population is very grateful to their health workers, but not as much with their politicians. It is believed, according to different research, that there were not just a only passing zero, even 8 different sources in the country. To talk about that, Ana Rodriguez, Spanish journalist in Madrid.
The first positive case of coronavirus in Spain was detected on January, more or less, in La Gomera. It was a German tourist who tested positive in the Canary Islands. He had been in contact with a Chinese citizen in Germany. It wouldn't be until almost a month later that the first case of coronavirus would be detected in the peninsula. It was in Barcelona and also imported. Since then, over 240,000 people have been infected in Spain.
Para decretar el estado de alarma en todo nuestro país, en toda España, durante los próximos.
What has been the main measure that the Spanish president has took?
In Spain, several measures have been taken to deal with this pandemic. Among them are the closure of borders, the state of alarm, or the lockdown, like in other countries. All of this has had a direct impact on the economy, which is why the government has had to create a plan to deal with this crisis. No? At the moment, we are in the de-escalation phase that contemplates 4 phases towards the new normality. And it is expected that it will conclude at the end of June.
During the previous week of the huge jump of cases in Spain, there were a lot of massive events. Both Spain's reactionary and progressive had their own one, taking part in this some members of the government. As a result of them, there could be a lot of cases, and the elective battles after.
The Minister of Health said that the main point of spread didn't take place during the protests of Women's Day or the event of Vox, an extreme right-wing party in Spain. The focus of spread in the last week of February, it could really have been at any time in public transport, in the subway, at work, at school. At that time, we weren't aware of the situation or of the danger to which we were exposed.
A pandemic is not easy to manage. It's about leadership, and the way that the Spanish government came across to it has caused a political division in the Spanish people. How is the support of the government?
I think that it depends on the phase. Now, 9 out of the 10 Spaniards believe that the opposition should support the government in managing the COVID-19 crisis, and that major paths for reconstruction should be made once the crisis is over, as proposed by the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. The reality has not been like that. The dialectic war between one and the other have been a constant throughout the pandemic. All of this has provoked sadness in the population, tired of seeing that their leaders sometimes don't seek the best for them, but rather pursue their ambitions. We are like tired. We want them to think a little bit more in us.
Se tendrían que trabajar más en cooperación, ¿no? La oposición, más que contraatacar continuamente, creo que deberían unirse al gobierno y, pues, digamos que trabajar juntos para intentar mejorar esta situación. Han llegado un poco tarde, pero claro, la situación también es un poco especial. Digamos que están como improvisando continuamente nuevas medidas. De hecho, te dicen un día una cosa y a lo mejor a los 3 días la rectifican o cambian cosas, entonces tienes que estar continuamente informada, buscando qué han cambiado, qué no han cambiado. Creo que sí que lo está haciendo un poco pues, a trompicones, ¿no? Pero claro, es que la situación es un poco complicada para tomar decisiones.
Creo que el gobierno, la actuación es mejorable, pero sí que veo cierto resquemor en la crítica al gobierno de que lo que quieren es intentar, vamos, hay veces que creo que por los ataques que hacen desde ciertos medios, ciertos grupos políticos, que parece que quieren que el gobierno tenga muchos muertos para atacarles con esta cantidad de gente que ha fallecido y echárselo en cara como que el gobierno les ha matado.
Prevalecerá.
This political support, or at least noisier support, is taking game box. The far-right party in Spain, being able to call to demonstrate by car to the society, claiming to the government about the deaths and the restriction of freedom due to the lockdown. That is what the people are struggling with. Furthermore, is asking to the government to resign.
I think that the concentration in different parts of Spain in Madrid have spread almost as fast as the coronavirus. It was amazing. Its saying is to protest against the president. The problem is that many times they didn't comply with the necessary social distancing measures to prevent a new outbreak of coronavirus. The protests have also spread to other cities. I think that they are tired because of the situation that now we are living. They also want answers, but maybe their way to find this answer is not the best way. We are having now a mix of feelings, no? We want to support the government, but we also want to have answer to know what is happening in our country.
The United Kingdom, the most European country affected by this virus with more than 40,000 deaths. 4 nations, one controversial prime minister whose life was in danger because of this disease. Saving policy from the herd immunity to the lockdown have cost many lives. Our focus will be in Scotland, talking with Remei Calabuig, Spanish correspondent for F Agency, in its capital, Edinburgh.
Good evening. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone. All over the world, we're seeing the devastating impact of this invisible killer. Without a huge national effort to halt the growth of this virus, there will come a moment when no health service in the world could possibly cope, because there won't be enough ventilators, enough intensive care beds, enough doctors and nurses. So it's vital to slow the spread of the disease. I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home, because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes. Shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible. One form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household. Any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home. The way ahead is hard, and it is still true that many lives will, sadly, be lost.
As a country of 4 nations, all of them follow the same path, closing up all activities were not essential and asking to the people for staying at home as a united message. Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, addressed her speech the same night.
From tonight, the only permissible reasons to leave your home are as follows. Firstly, to shop for basic necessities, and I'm asking that you should limit that to once a day. Second, to take exercise, again, once a day, but to do so alone or with your own household, not in groups. Third, for medical reasons or to care for a vulnerable person. And fourthly, to travel to essential work if that work cannot be done at home.
Scotland imposed the lockdown in the same way like the rest of the UK nations. And so people were only allowed to go out to buy the essentials, food, drugs, and pretty much it. Then the idea was that everybody stay at home to stop the spread of the virus. And that's it. We are only allowed to go out for exercise once a day and to help vulnerable people if you are a carer or if you are an essential worker. And it seems that it's working because COVID-19 cases and deaths are now slowing down, and it seems that the R number, that is the number in which you measure the spread of the virus, is decreasing, so the rate of infection is lower. Scotland till now has followed the the UK advice in spreading in stopping the spread of the virus. Any change would be guided by scientific advice, and everything would be closely monitored to be sure that it's secure to lift these measures.
The Prime Minister set out some of the detail of his plan for easing restrictions in England. More of the detail of that has emerged this morning and will continue to come out during the course of today. I want to reiterate that those announcements do not apply yet here in Scotland. That is not, let me stress, for any political reason. It is because the Scottish Government is not yet confident. My basic message for Scotland remains the same as it has been. Please stay at home, except for essential purposes. I have made clear, however, that the Scottish Government will keep what constitutes an essential purpose under review.
As the First Minister Sif and took a different path at that moment, she could have done it before, applying the lockdown measures earlier.
Maybe an earlier lockdown would be more efficient to avoid death, but most governments did the same in other parts of the world because they were quite reluctant to stop the economy, to shutting everything down because of the economic crisis that could follow this virus crisis. There is a study from the University of Edinburgh that says that if Scotland imposed the lockdown before, have imposed the lockdown before, it could be more than 2,000 deaths could be avoided. And that's something that has been quite controversial here because it might be revealed that we could have avoided people dying from the virus. Mm-hmm. They suggest that the death rate in Scotland could have been reduced by about 80% with earlier measures, which is something quite shocking. The Scottish Government has been saying that they have taken the actions that they thought were the best to stop the spread of the virus and that they've been guided by the scientific advice. So that's something that is controversial, as I said, because we really don't know what could have happened.
After 2 months under a very impressive measures where the normal life has been almost erased, how is the Scottish people towards their government?
I think people are quite sensible now, and they understand that it's very important to comply with the rules. So, and I think that's the feeling I'm getting, but as well, polls suggest that people understand how the Scottish Government is handling the situation. There is a YouGov poll that said 74% of the Scottish public think Sturgeon's government, Nicola Sturgeon's government, is doing a great job. That could be good for the SNP, for the Scottish National Party, because we need to bear in mind that we have an election next year, and this is something very important because the SNP has been criticized a lot because of the cuts in public services and because of the actual state of education, the NHS. So that's something that the SNP can get gains from this crisis because of the way they are dealing with the coronavirus crisis. And this could be something that has a good impact on their election results. So let's see what if in the end, because we are still in the process of the lockdown and lifting the measures, so we need to see how everything develops. But this could be a gain for the SNP in terms of election results.
Scotland, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon, she is slightly more, I would say humane. I would describe her humane towards her people, towards the Scottish people, and she reacted better than Boris, I believe.
Scotland, we're very, very, very lucky to have Nicola Sturgeon. I feel safe with her leading us through this. I feel like Boris doesn't know what he's saying, what he's doing at all. It's like he's got an earpiece right here, and every time he's on TV, he's being told what to say, but then the earpiece cuts out, so he just makes up a whole load of garbage. I feel safe being in Scotland. Nicola is looking after us in a way that she's thinking about us as humans. She's thinking of the fact that she doesn't want the death rates to go, well, higher, any higher. I feel like Boris is thinking about the economy, which, yeah, is important, but he's not considering, there's just a different aspect to it when it comes to his view on people's lives and health, and I think he just doesn't know what he's doing.
It's now inevitable that we will close schools and
But of
nurseries.
course, there are always some points, as has been proved, for people who have been in the first line and the entire community who have been fighting this virus. Things that could have been done better, taking it still having its impact on them, for instance, in such an important sector as education one.
At first, I had a lot of anxiety about it. As the nursery was, we were told by the government everything was going on lockdown. We were told that, like, you know, key workers, we were classed as key workers, we had to support key workers, and I was like, right, okay, we'll do that. Then I found out that it's only private nurseries that were to do that, and council nurseries weren't. And I felt angered that the government, in a way, it was like, we're not respected or represented enough. So it was just like, oh, it's fine, not just let the private nurseries deal with all this, and we just care for our own. You know, I felt very angered and upset, and yeah, no, I cried quite a few times during those 2 weeks when everything was changing every day because of the stress, because of trying to work out staffing, to try and make sure, like, we were safe, to make sure the parents and the families were safe. And because everything was every day, even hourly, we were being given government things changing the whole dynamic of nursery life, to the point where the owner of the business decided, nope, that's it, I am making the choice to close the nursery, it's not worth it. She made a point of saying, I'd rather my business go under and my staff are safe, rather than staying open and risking my staff. Quite a percentage of the staff do have underlying health issues. She would have hated any of them to get this virus and not survive it. So she made the decision to close the nursery before the government got in touch with us and said it's not worth you staying open because you only have 3 or 4 children using the setting.
The Secretary of State will be aware of the February outbreak of COVID-19 at an international Nike conference in central Edinburgh. In a catastrophic error of judgment, the Scottish Government decided that the Scottish public would not be informed, despite that being contrary to Scottish public health legislation. The public could have helped with the
Besides, as well, at the beginning of this situation, according to a BBC report, this was not the only critical point. The government could have not been totally transparent about the first cases.
On the Nike convention in this Hilton hotel in Edinburgh, that was something that has been discovered in some way by a BBC investigation, and there have been reports saying that the government, the Nicola Sturgeon government, tried to cover up what happened in that convention, where many people get the virus and then some of them stay in Scotland because they were from here. So that could be like the first cases reported of coronavirus in Scotland. So that would be something huge, because we've been said that the first case that we get in Scotland was the 1st of March, and that convention was at the end of February. So that would mean that the Scottish government wasn't transparent about the first case that would take place in the Nike convention and not the one reported on the 1st of March. So yeah, Ian Murray, as you said, the Labour MP, he has been calling for this investigation. I think that's something that needs to be revised. And if there was any mishandling of the situation or any cover-up from the Scottish government, of course, I think there would be the need of this investigation. But I think that should be conducted by the Scottish Parliament.
On the accusation of a cover-up, that is complete and utter nonsense. Why would we have been trying to cover anything up? This was, we were reporting figures on this. I've stood up here every single day to be as open and transparent with you, the public, as possible. There is no interest in covering these things up. So that is nonsense. And actually, I don't know where that accusation comes from, but it sounds like highly politicised.
Media have played a very important role. We mentioned the BBC investigation, and that's something that's a clear example of good covering, and something that is essential that media do in always, but especially when we are in the middle of a crisis like now. So that's something that I think they need to keep doing this kind of investigations, this taking all, with all the means to get the governments to be accountable. Another thing that I wanted to add is that these days, during this pandemic, I have seen that British media have been reporting much more about domestic violence, that it's something that they don't really cover on a daily basis. And now, since the lockdown was imposed, they have been talking about the number of women killings and children killings because from the situation of being at home with their perpetrators, domestic abuse has rocketed, and that's something really important. And I think that's a good example of what media can do in moments of crisis.
Until no superpower, the country who has dominated the whole planet after the World War, the United States of America is, furthermore, where the virus has hit with more violence. Being its capital the war epicenter of this pandemic, 114,000 deaths, huge jump of unemployment never seen since the Great Depression, a controversial president. Sarah Yañez, Spanish correspondent in New York City, will give us a quick glance of the situation.
So, the first cases were coming from China, and the first case was in January 21st, and it was in Washington State. Was a man that was like 30 years old that had traveled to Wuhan. After the first case that was a local transmission was around the end of February, and it was in California. And the first death in the States was at the end of February, but then they realized that it was one before, because they did the autopsy, and they realized it was around February 6th in California. That was the first death. And what is interesting is like through all Washington State and California, all of these cases came from China, but the cases that came in New York were coming from Europe. In New York, the first case was a man who traveled to Italy, and actually they asked them in immigration if he has been to Iran or China, but they didn't ask him if he traveled to Italy. But at the time, it was a country with a lot of cases.
Since the first case, how the city of New York has arrived to this situation? When did the lockdown begin?
In New York, so March 13, I think the following Monday, the schools they ordered to not open the schools, and so March 13, I think it was on Friday. So the whole weekend it was open like nothing. Like all the shops were open, all the bars were open, and the weather was quite nice for the time. So there was like a lot of activity outside, at least in New York City. And on Monday they closed the schools, and on Tuesday was going to be St. Patrick's, and is when they closed the bars as well. But the stay at home, so Tuesday was the 17th, I believe, and the stay at home orders in New York started the 22nd of March.
In New York, at the moment is the war epidemic outbreak. How is the city in this moment? How is all the environment? How is the society?
It is quite empty, and if you go to richest areas, they are quite devastated. And at the beginning, it was even more because there was like no traffic as well. But for example, in a neighborhood like mine, it's been always quite busy, even though it was a lockdown. And yes, there is less traffic and people are wearing masks because in New York you must wear a mask. You can see basically what you see in New York right now is there is a class gap. So very richer people or people that can work from home, they agree with the stay-at-home orders, even though they think that it's tough, but they do agree with it. But people that need to work in contact with people, they don't really agree with the stay home because it's been already 2 months, and they do need to work. There is a lot of waitresses, there is a lot of cookers, there's all these jobs that are going down. And as well, the other part of New York, in New York, you have a lot of undocumented people. And it is true that, so for unemployed, so people that are from the States or they have their green cards or they are here legally, they can apply for unemployment. And that's why an okay money, like if you're making, if you used to make a lot of money, it's not good. But if your minimum wage is a good chunk of money. But undocumented people are having no money at all, non-income, and most of undocumented people work in they work in non-essential places. They work at restaurants, and yes, some restaurants still open for pickup, but it's not it's not the same. Like they maybe they have only half the stuff.
If they are not registered in any kind of statistic, if they don't have the green card and they are not documented, they don't get any kind of income from the government.
Nothing at all. They can get help for food. There is a lot of places in New York that are giving free meals to people, and you can go with kids or without a kid, and they've been having places since the beginning, but they have no help to pay the rents, for example.
The unemployment situation for law, like in other parts of the world, has increased overnight. A lot of people have lost their incomes, as George Floyd from Houston, 46 years old. In the afternoon of the 25th of May, he was about to pay cigarette with a $20 fake note. According to the seller, he was drunk and upset when he called to the police. Once they arrived, Josh's mood was far distant to be nervous or even upset. The police either tried to arrest him or take him.
Please, I can't breathe. Please, man.
nation is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob.
This was the last straw, and we've seen so much hardship. It was time to get out, like pandemic or not.
I'm proud of the protests, but I'm not proud of the destruction. My brother wasn't about that. Power to the people. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Did you hear me? Did you hear me? I said power to the people. Not just my people. Not just your people. Not just the people they think is important or whatever. I'm talking about power to the people. All of us.
The first case in Africa was confirmed the 14th of February. It was a Chinese citizen in Egypt. And at the moment, the situation in the continent is like this. I mean, we have roughly a little bit more than 3,400 deaths, 115,000 cases, and 46,000 recoveries. That's the situation in Africa right now. And in Kenya, we have, as a result of the pandemic, 52 deaths, 402 recoveries, and 1,286 cases. And in Kenya, the first case of coronavirus was confirmed on the 13th of March. It was a 27-year-old Kenyan woman who traveled from the US via London. I mean, a pandemic like this obviously means many challenges for Africa. I mean, things like, for example, low testing capacity on most African countries. We have in many countries very vulnerable healthcare systems. Low numbers of ventilators and intensive care beds. I can give you an example. The Central African Republic, well, they have 3 ventilators for a population of almost 5 million people. So imagine Kenya, which is obviously a more developed country. The country's health network has only 259 functional ventilators for a population of around 51 million people. So, I mean, there are very, very important challenges there. But it has to be said as well that so far, Africa is the least affected region globally in terms of the number of COVID-19 cases and deaths. You may ask, or we may wonder, why is that? I mean, so what's behind Africa coronavirus containment? I mean, we have to keep in mind, you mentioned before Ebola, for example.
Yeah.
Well, Ebola was a huge challenge for countries, particularly in Western Africa. But as a result of that, there is an experience that is being applied now to fight the current pandemic. I mean, in many airports across the continent, there are test facilities that were put in place as a result of the Ebola crisis. So that is an experience that Africa is taking advantage of. Also, we have to keep in mind that African governments were very quick to take action and slow the spread of the virus, despite the cost to communities and economies when in places like, I mean, Europe or the United States, many governments only reacted when the situation was out of control. In Africa, many countries took measures very early to avoid the spread of the disease. Another difference between Africa and Western countries is that there is a more restricted access to equipment here. I mean, many African health authorities are unable to obtain the supplies needed as powerful countries mobilize economic, political, and strategic power to get stocks for their populations. But on the other hand, and this is a very positive note about African countries, on the other hand, African countries have been able to find innovative local technology to manufacture face masks, shields, gloves, gowns, etc. I mean, countries like South Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Morocco are leading the way in that regard. I mean, local companies are manufacturing staff and equipment that is not easy to get from abroad. So I mean, that is a very positive note regarding how Africa is tackling this crisis.
How the government are trying to stop this spread of this virus in Kenya.
Well, when it comes to the particular situation in Kenya reacted very quickly. I mean, in response to the rise of coronavirus cases in Kenya, they first reacted when they had just 3 cases. Imagine, only 3 cases. And that happened on the 15th of March. The government of Kenya closed all schools and directed that all public and private sector workers work from home wherever is possible. Travel restrictions were later imposed to prevent non-residents from entry. We have a suspension of all international flights in place, with the exception of cargo flights. Obviously, all public gatherings at churches, mosques, funerals were restricted to no more than 15 people. Weddings are banned right now. Countrywide, we have a curfew in place. Kenya was very, very quick to react. I mean, the government here is aware that the health system is not a strong health system. The health system here is not able to cope with a crisis like the ones we have seen in Spain or Italy or France or the UK. The health system in such a situation here would collapse, simply like that, would collapse. So the government is obviously very aware of that, and they were quick to react. Obviously, these measures are difficult to impose or to be implemented in some areas in the country, particularly in the densely populated areas like the slums, right? Many people live in Nairobi low-income settlements, and which are overcrowded, and where sanitation and social distancing measures are almost near impossible to maintain. So that's a challenge.
As among nearly 500,000 refugees in Kenya, many escaped the conflicts in neighbouring Somalia and South Sudan. Most live in camps like Kakuma.
You have to keep in mind that there are many people in this country, not only in this country, across the continent, who need to work every day to be able to eat. It's as simple as that. So obviously there is a concern about the disease, but many people here will rather prefer to die from COVID-19 than dying from hunger. The economic impact of the pandemic is been terrible. I mean, across the world, but in places like Africa, where millions of people live under, you know, the poverty line, not being able to go out to do your job because of a restriction put in place to contain the virus is a huge challenge. And many people will not respect, you know, those measures. They will simply go out, try to earn some money, because many of them, they have a family behind to sustain. I mean, they have to put, you know, some meals on the table. They need to make sure, you know, kids have everything they need. And if they don't earn money today, they won't be able to do anything.
Is the Kenyan government giving any kind of support to the population?
Some economic stimulus packages being announced by the government. I mean, how far that is going to go, how many people that is going to cover, it's very difficult to foresee right now. I mean, in countries like Kenya, we don't have a state like in countries like in Spain, for example, where the state is gonna guarantee a support for the most vulnerable population. Here, there is no money. I mean, this country is struggling to pay, you know, many debts.
My administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Everybody knows what's going on there.
Obviously, to halt funding to the World Health Organization, that is going to have a significant impact on Africa's public health efforts, but not only when it comes to containing COVID-19, also when it comes to polio, when it comes to malaria, when it comes to HIV. I mean, the United States was the World Health Organization's biggest donor, contributing $400 million a year. So that is going to have a very important impact in the World Health Organization projects being carried out across Africa. The World Bank has been releasing funds to help African countries to fight the pandemic. It has also warned that economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa is forecasted to be negative this year, minus 5.1% compared to the 2.4% of 2019. So the effect of the coronavirus pandemic may push the region into its first recession in nearly 25 years. So the forecast is not very optimistic at all.
This virus has been, well, the first outbreak, the really first outbreak, and later on was global one, was in China. China has a lot of investment in Africa to help to develop different cities, different economic activities. But until the virus hasn't reached Europe, there wasn't any kind of cases. Then I don't know if there could be any kind of link. And furthermore, if there are any kind of movement like is happening in the Western country, that they are trying to take advantage of this pandemic situation to put some ones against another ones, there are any kind of movement that they are blaming to the Europeans ones to bring the virus to Africa?
I don't think that is something happening now, but we have to remember that at the beginning of this crisis, when I mean the first cases were confirmed in Africa, those cases were mainly European citizens coming back to Africa from Europe. So there was some sort of fear about European fear and anger about European citizens moving around in Africa. We had some situations of even in Kenya, of people coming across European citizens, Chinese citizens, and getting very angry, very angry, telling them to go away because they brought the virus. I think that that has changed, because now most of cases, if not all of them, are local cases. There's a local transmission going on. You cannot blame now foreigners coming into the country. As I said, most of the transmission is local. Regarding China, we have to remember that China is the main trade partner of Africa. And it's also its main bilateral creditor. So there's a debate now going on because of the huge economic impact of the pandemic on the continent. And there's a debate going on regarding the Africa-Chinese debt, which amounts to $150 billion. That's a lot of money. So the big question is, should China forgive the debt? Many experts are doubting that. It looks like China may delay, but not forgive the African debt. China is also helping the continent. It's what they call, or what is called by many experts, soft power. I mean, they have sent doctors and equipment to several countries, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe. There has been also a very generous donation of test kits and personal protective equipment by the millionaire Jack Ma, Alibaba founder. I mean, this gentleman sent all that equipment to all 54 African countries, and that has been a big boost to national efforts in order to control COVID-19. So China is playing a huge role in Africa, really. I mean, on the one hand, they are trying to help, but on the other hand, they are not giving any relief to Africa's huge debt.
SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that has done impossible to say goodbye to our loved ones, even when it has happened, trying to keep them alive, staying away from them. How contradictory is it? Lucky's one has not seen them face to face for how long travel restrictions had took place. This virus has bars in the human life, remembering them how fragile and chaotic is it. After being working in your career, fighting for your dreams.
I mean, I don't know exactly, because I just finished my studies and I'm working freelance. I've got some works until maybe July. I was planning to look for jobs, and now I'm contacting job agencies, recruitment agencies, to see if they can do something to help. But at the moment, the creative industry is not looking good. So I'm worried that I will have to wait in order to find a proper job. I was hoping the timing for this has been really bad, because I've been studying 4 years of my life here. And I was hoping that at the end of this journey, I could just look for jobs, because I have the experience. I've been working a lot. And but this is not possible now because of the social distancing. I mean,
does not care about that, about the timing. Although the spillover effects for some great causes have been a spark for the change. This virus,
it could totally redefine the way we live as human beings. If someone's upset, I want to make sure they're okay. I want to, are you okay? Are you wanting a hug? I like to comfort through physical contact. So if I see my friend is upset or crying, or even someone in the street who's fallen down, I want to make sure they're okay. And now it's like in the future, it's a case where it's like, well, do we have to stop being human and showing?
Maybe if in China there weren't this obsession to not give bad news without the need to, or being afraid of your bosses, Donald Trump would have not decided to hold the American funds to the World Health Organization as a tantrum because of this one's congratulates to China for its late reaction over this pandemic, and the consequences that this could have for the people who live in a continent where the most of them are below the poverty line. Maybe if there were more love and less fear and political interest, just being human beings, nothing of this would have happened.